12 years. It's a measure of time that can either heal a wound or let it fester. For Sarah Miller, it was an eternity of silence after her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, vanished from her bed, leaving no trace. A cold case. A family shattered. But on the day she finally decides to sell her home, a forgotten toy yields a discovery that shatters her grief and resurrects a terrifying question. The voice on a hidden tape recorder isn't Lily's, but that of another child, whispering of a secret garden. Now Sarah must confront a chilling truth. The past isn't just gone, it's been meticulously hidden. And the hunt for her daughter has just begun. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from and how old you are, and subscribe to our channel to receive new stories every day that will thrill your heart. I hope you enjoy the story. 12 years. It was a number that had ceased to be a simple measure of time and had become, for Sarah Miller, a brand seared onto her soul. 12 years since her daughter Lily had vanished from her bed, leaving behind nothing but an open window and a void that had swallowed their lives whole. The house itself, nestled in a quiet Oregon suburb, felt like a relic from a past life. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sunlight, thick and heavy, like the ghosts of 1,000 forgotten memories. The air, once filled with the scent of crayons, pancakes, and a little girl's laughter, now smelled only of old wood and the stale ache of a long-standing silence. Sarah moved through the rooms like a ghost herself, her movements slow and deliberate. She was packing the last of the boxes, an act of finality that felt both necessary and impossible. She and David, her husband of 20 years, had finally signed the divorce papers a month ago. The shared grief that had once bound them together had, over time, become a corrosive acid, eating away at the foundation of their love until there was nothing left. David, an architect of quiet perfection, was downstairs, his presence a heavy, comforting weight that she no longer had a right to. He was taping a box in the kitchen, the methodical rip of the packing tape a stark contrast to the chaos inside her. She had saved Lily's room for last. It was the only part of the house that had remained untouched since that night. The wallpaper with its faded pink butterflies, the small white dresser covered in peeling stickers, the bed with its worn unicorn comforter. Every detail was a knife to the heart. It was a mausoleum, not of a person, but of a possibility. The possibility of a life that never was. With a deep, shuddering breath, Sarah knelt before a large cardboard box in the corner, labeled simply, Lily. The lid was taped shut with the same heavy-duty packing tape David used, his neat, precise handiwork, a small, heartbreaking comfort. She carefully slit the tape with a utility knife and folded back the flaps. Inside was a time capsule of a childhood frozen at 6 years old. There were crayon drawings on crinkled paper, their vibrant colors muted with age, a collection of smooth river stones Lily had gathered on a family vacation, and a pile of her favorite stuffed animals. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for a purple owl plush toy, its fabric worn smooth from countless hugs. This one was Lily's absolute favorite. She remembered the day they had bought it at a small toy shop. Lily had named it Hootie. Sarah ran her thumb over its single sewn-on eye, a tear tracing a path through the fine dust on her cheek. As she held the toy, a strange metallic weight shifted within its seams. Her breath caught in her throat. Curiosity, a feeling she hadn't truly felt in years, overpowered the grief. She carefully pried open a loose seam on the owl's back and reached inside, her fingers brushing against a smooth, red plastic object. It was a small cassette recorder, the kind she had bought Lily for her 6th birthday. The batteries were dead, but David, always the meticulous one, had placed a small, folded note beside it with instructions. For when the batteries run out. It was the kind of thoughtfulness that had once been a symbol of his love, now a cruel reminder of the life they had lost. Sarah's heart, a fragile bird that had been caged for 12 years, began to beat a frantic rhythm. She found new batteries in a kitchen drawer, her hands fumbling with the tiny metal clasps. The familiar click of the battery compartment snapping shut echoed in the silence. She held the recorder, its red plastic cool against her palm. A wave of nausea washed over her. What if she heard a message from Lily? What if it was a final, "I love you," from that last night? Or worse, a cry for help that she was too late to answer. With a deep, shuddering breath, she pressed the play button. The machine whirred, a scratchy static filling the air. Sarah leaned in, her eyes squeezed shut, bracing herself for her daughter's voice. But then, a small, unfamiliar voice, not Lily's, crackled through the tinny speaker. Testing, testing. This is a message for the fairies. Lily says to tell you the secret garden is safe. He's going to keep it safe for us. The voice was sweet and innocent, but its words were a bizarre, nonsensical puzzle. Sarah's heart, which had just dared to hope, plunged back into the abyss. It wasn't Lily. The brutal collision of her hope with this new, unsettling reality was a physical blow. Who was this child? Why was she talking about a secret garden? The static returned, louder this time. Sarah, disoriented and shaking, tried to rewind the tape. Her thumb pressed the button over and over, desperate to hear the voice again, to make sense of what she had just heard. Then, another message, this one shorter, almost a whisper, crackled through the speaker. It was the same child's voice, but more urgent. Don't turn off the lights. Keep them on, always. He says it's very important to keep the lights on. The recording ended. Sarah sat on the floor, the toy and the recorder in her lap, the silence of the empty house screaming around her. She was a journalist by trade, a hunter of stories, a seeker of truth. And now, she had a story. A strange, terrifying, and unbelievably painful story that had somehow been hidden inside her daughter's favorite toy for 12 years. This wasn't grief anymore. It was an obsession, a purpose. She knew with a chilling certainty that seeped into her bones that the house could wait. The packing could wait. Her life of silent sorrow was over. The journey had just begun. And her first clue, the first flickering light in the darkness, was a strange little girl whispering about a secret garden and the need to keep the lights on. The haunting whisper from the tape recorder, secret garden, was a spark in the suffocating darkness of Sarah Miller's life. It didn't bring hope, not in the traditional sense, but a furious, all-consuming purpose that clawed its way out of the paralysis of her grief. For 12 years, she had been defined by absence, by the ghost of a child she couldn't save. Now, she was defined by a single, cryptic clue. The reporter inside her, buried under a mountain of sorrow, had been resurrected. She spent the rest of the day not packing, but meticulously transcribing the faint recording, her hands trembling as she replayed the static and the child's tiny voice. Her journalistic mind, once a finely tuned instrument for gathering facts, began to connect invisible threads. Secret garden. Keep the lights on. They weren't the innocent ramblings of a child. They were puzzle pieces from a different game, a sinister one. Sarah moved with a feverish intensity she hadn't felt since before Lily disappeared. The internet became her archive, her source of truth. She scoured local property records, searching for anything David might have built or commissioned in the years following Lily's disappearance. Her search turned up nothing concrete, but a new, more immediate detail stopped her cold. The house, her house, was listed. An innocuous-looking for sale sign had been posted in the yard just yesterday, a detail she had been too numb to notice. A wave of betrayal washed over her. David, the man who had insisted they keep the house as a monument to their daughter, as a place where they could feel her presence, was now selling it off like a used car. The act was a desecration. The afternoon sun was sinking below the horizon, casting long, menacing shadows across the living room. When David came back from a grief support meeting, his face was composed, his posture straight, a portrait of dignified sorrow. He was the perfect grieving father, a role he played so well for the public. But now, through Sarah's new lens of suspicion, she saw the cracks in the facade. She saw the careful, almost practiced control in his movements, the way his eyes darted to the box she had left open in the hallway. "The house is on the market," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion, a shield against the pain. "You didn't think to tell me?" David's composure didn't break. He simply set his keys on the entryway table. "It's time, Sarah. We have to move on." It's been 12 years. His words were soft, patronizing, designed to sound reasonable. Move on? She echoed, her voice rising now. You told me we could never leave. That this house was Lily's home, her spirit's home. You called it a sacred space. What changed? He turned to face her, his hands tucked into his pockets, a subtle, defensive posture. Our lives changed, Sarah. Our marriage is over. This is my property now. I have to do what's best for me. His words were a cold, calculated betrayal, a final severing of all the promises they had ever made. The emotional peak of the confrontation ignited in the quiet suburban kitchen. The room that had once been the heart of their family, where Lily had helped them bake cookies, now felt like a sterile interrogation room. What is the secret garden, David? Sarah blurted out, her voice a desperate, cracking whisper. She saw it then, a flicker of something she had never seen before in his eyes. A flash of fear, raw and unguarded, that was instantly masked by a practiced calm. I have no idea what you're talking about, he said, his tone sharpening. What have you been doing? Going through old boxes? Digging up old ghosts? You have to stop doing this to yourself, Sarah. It's not healthy. This is why we couldn't make it work. You're paralyzed by this. You've convinced yourself that some new clue will magically appear, but it's not going to. There is no secret garden. There is no happy ending. There's only the hard, ugly truth that our daughter is gone. His words, meant to sound empathetic, felt like gaslighting, a deliberate attempt to make her doubt her own sanity. The emotional betrayal was a physical weight in the room, pressing down on her, suffocating her. He was twisting her grief, her love for Lily, into a weapon against her. She stood her ground, her fists clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. I am not paralyzed, she hissed. I am awake for the first time in 12 years, and you're lying to me. I know it. He didn't respond with words, only with a condescending shake of his head before walking away, leaving her to fester in the venom of his dismissal. But his betrayal, instead of breaking her, only hardened her resolve. Later that evening, after David had left the house for a client meeting, Sarah began to search. Not just for boxes, but for answers. She knew David had kept his old architectural blueprints in his home office, a room that had been his private sanctuary. She found them in a hidden compartment behind a fake wooden panel, a secret she had never known about in all their years of marriage. The discovery of that secret compartment alone was enough to make her heart race. She unrolled the large, dusty scrolls of paper, the smell of old ink and ancient paper filling the air. She found the original blueprints for their house, a beautiful hand-drawn map of their former life. Her heart pounded as she scanned the detailed floor plan. And there it was. In the basement, in an area that was now his workshop, a section of the plan was smudged, deliberately and carefully erased. A faint outline of a room, a smaller one than the others, was still visible. A small, almost imperceptible line of text was scrawled at the bottom of the section, as if a later addition. Sarah squinted, her mind struggling to make out the faded words. It read, "Security room." The ink was smeared, as if David had tried to erase it, but the faint ghost of the words remained. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was concrete. It was tangible, and it was hidden within the very walls of the home he had built for their family. Sarah's desperation, a cold, hard knot in the pit of her stomach, propelled her to a quiet, tree-lined street on the other side of town. She was in a part of the city she and David had once considered for a move, a place filled with neat lawns and two-story homes that whispered of a settled, uneventful life. It was a world away from the emotional battlefield of her own house. The name on the mailbox was Ben Carter, and as Sarah's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, she felt a profound sense of foreboding. He was David's former architectural partner, a man who had mysteriously parted ways with the firm a decade ago, a detail Sarah had never questioned until now. She knocked on the front door, the sound a hollow echo in the quiet afternoon. The door opened a crack, revealing a sliver of a man she barely recognized. Ben Carter had been a vibrant, energetic presence in her old life, a man with a booming laugh and a perpetual tan from too much time on the golf course. The man who stood before her now was a ghost. His hair, once a vibrant brown, was now a salt-and-pepper shock of gray, and the lines on his face were carved with a deep, weary sadness. His eyes, sunken and dark, flitted nervously between Sarah and the street behind her. "Sarah, I wasn't expecting you," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. He didn't open the door wider. "Ben, I need to talk to you, about David, about the security room," she said, cutting straight to the point. The words hung in the air like a physical accusation. Ben flinched visibly, his hands tightening on the doorknob. "I don't know what you're talking about," he whispered, but his eyes betrayed him. They were filled with a raw, undeniable terror. "Please," Sarah pleaded. "I have the blueprints. I know there's something you're not telling me. I need to know what you built for him." Ben's resistance crumbled. He opened the door and ushered her inside, his movements furtive, as if expecting to be followed. The house was a monument to his despair. A heavy layer of dust coated every surface, and the scent of stale air and forgotten coffee hung in the air. He led her to a small, cluttered office where a half-empty bottle of whiskey stood sentinel on his desk. He sat down, not in the plush, leather chair of a successful architect, but on the edge of a worn wooden stool, his posture hunched, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "He called it a client project," Ben began, his voice barely a whisper. "Said it was for a high-profile developer, a paranoid millionaire who wanted a panic room disguised as a wine cellar." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "But it was all wrong. The plans were too detailed. The materials were over the top. He had me get soundproofing foam, the kind they use in recording studios. He had me install reinforced steel in the walls and door, not just for a panic room, but to completely seal it off. And he paid me in cash, every step of the way." The weight of his confession was suffocating. Ben had been complicit, a willing pawn in a game he didn't understand. His guilt was a physical presence in the room, a palpable miasma of shame and regret. Sarah listened, her own breath catching in her throat as the details of David's meticulous planning began to emerge. The secrecy, the lies, the meticulousness. It was all a facade for a monstrous project. "I didn't know what it was for," Ben said, his voice cracking. "I swear to God, Sarah, I had no idea. But a few months after Lily, he told me the project was a failure, that the client had gone bankrupt. He paid me a huge sum to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Said the project had to be scrubbed from all records. I was scared. I had a wife, a family. I just wanted to forget about it." The peak of emotion arrived as Ben slowly pushed a drawer open with a trembling hand and pulled out a large rolled-up cylinder of paper. It was an original, a blueprint from the firm, its edges yellowed with age. Unlike the digital plan Sarah had found, this one wasn't smudged or altered. He unrolled it on the desk, the paper smelling of old ink and fear. And there it was. In the far corner of the basement, a small room with an unmistakably thick border. It was labeled, in David's own neat handwriting, "Safe Room." Next to the title was a small, unsettling symbol, a stylized butterfly, drawn with an architect's precision. Sarah's blood ran cold. The butterfly was the same design she had on Lily's bedroom wallpaper. It was David's sickening joke, his twisted signature on a crime committed in plain sight. For Sarah, the sight of the blueprint was a punch to the gut and a shot of pure adrenaline all at once. The rage that had been simmering inside her for 12 years boiled over into a ferocious heat. She was right. David had been lying all along. Ben, however, was terrified. As Sarah reached for the blueprint, he pulled it back, his eyes darting to the window. "I've told you all I can," he stammered, his voice laced with panic. "I can't go to the police. He's dangerous, Sarah. I can't put my family at risk." He handed her the blueprint, his hands shaking, a silent plea for her to leave. He was her ally, but only in this quiet, treacherous space. She understood. He was a coward, but a useful one. He was a small piece of a much larger, darker puzzle, a piece she now held in her hands. Sarah's mind was racing, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. She didn't waste another moment on Ben. She had the proof. She had the truth. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number for Detective Anya Sharma, the number she had long ago committed to memory. The detective, whose voice was tired and weary from years on the force, was initially skeptical. "Sarah, you know the case is cold. We followed every lead." "This is different," Sarah insisted, her voice tight with a newfound authority. "I have proof. Physical proof. I know where Lily was. I know what he built. I know there's a secret room." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence heavy with a decade of failure. Then, Detective Sharma's voice, now tinged with a reluctant curiosity, came back on. "Send me the address. I'll meet you there." The click of the phone call ending was not the sound of a closed door, but of one finally, after 12 long years, being pushed open. The fight was just beginning, and Sarah was no longer fighting alone. The evening air hung heavy with a damp chill, carrying the distant scent of pine and oncoming rain. Sarah stood in the driveway, the glow of the police cruiser's lights strobing against the windows of her former home. Detective Anya Sharma, her face a mask of weary professionalism, gave a curt nod to the patrol officers. Her gaze, sharp and assessing, met Sarah's. "Let's get this over with, Mrs. Miller," she said, her voice betraying a hint of the skepticism she had masked on the phone. "I hope for all our sakes that your tip is a good one." Sarah didn't answer. She simply clutched Ben's hand-drawn blueprint, the paper crinkling in her grasp, and led the way inside. The house, now lit by the cold, stark light of police flashlights, felt alien and menacing. They moved through the familiar rooms, their footsteps echoing with a hollow sound that was new to the space. The living room, where Lily had once built pillow forts, was now just a collection of shrouded furniture. The hallway, where she had learned to ride her tricycle, was a corridor to a terrible truth. In the basement, the air was thick with the scent of dust and old concrete. A single exposed bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long, menacing shadows. Sarah pointed to the spot marked on the blueprint. "Here," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "It should be right here. He built a false wall." Detective Sharma, flanked by 2 uniformed officers, approached the wall. She tapped on the surface, her ear pressed close. A hollow, resonant thud confirmed Sarah's words. The detective's skeptical facade cracked, replaced by a flicker of grudging respect and a professional urgency. She nodded to an officer, who produced a heavy pry bar. The sound of metal scraping against wood was sharp and violent, a jarring intrusion into the silent grief that had defined this house for so long. The officer worked with a controlled ferocity, the crowbar splintering the trim, tearing through the carefully disguised seams. Sarah watched, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was it. This was the moment. The hope she had been trying to suppress for 12 years, the tiny, fragile thing that had been born from a random tape recorder, was now screaming to be set free. With a final, sickening crack, the wall gave way. A large section of drywall swung inward, revealing a dark, silent space behind it. An officer shined his flashlight inside, its beam cutting through the inky blackness. Sarah pushed forward, a desperate cry catching in her throat. Her hope, a beautiful and terrifying thing, was about to be realized. But the room was empty. The light from the flashlight played across bare concrete walls, a floor that had been swept clean, and a single, sealed air vent. The space was small, no more than 6 by 8 feet, a tomb. There were no toys, no furniture, no evidence of Lily's life, or of any life at all. The air was stale and heavy, the smell of recycled dust and the ghost of 1,000 memories now turned to ash. The hope that had soared so high within Sarah's chest now plummeted, a stone thrown into an endless void. The air rushed out of her lungs in a painful gasp, and she stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. All this, the torment, the searching, the new betrayal, only for this. An empty, sterile room. A lie within a lie. The sheer, overwhelming disappointment was a physical force, knocking the wind out of her, stealing the color from the world. "Mrs. Miller," Detective Sharma began, her voice filled with a genuine, albeit pained, empathy. Sarah shook her head, unable to speak, her eyes blurring with a sudden rush of bitter tears. She fell to her knees in the dirt of the basement floor, the blueprint of a life that was never hers crumpling beneath her. This was the end. The final, brutal conclusion to her 12-year-long nightmare. But as her gaze swept across the floor, a flicker of light caught her eye. It was small, a gleam of red plastic half buried beneath a loose floorboard near the far corner of the room. It was another cassette recorder, smaller and more discreet than the first. It wasn't the toy Lily had received for her birthday. It was a cheap, generic model, tucked away as if it had been discarded in a hurry. A new wave of adrenaline, cold and sharp, coursed through her veins, chasing away the despair. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. She crawled across the floor, her hands shaking as she pulled the recorder free. Her fingers fumbled to press the play button, the click of the plastic a deafening sound in the silence. The static returned, but this time it was followed by a familiar yet impossibly different voice. It was Lily. "Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? My special friend is with me. He says it's okay to talk now." The voice was not terrified. It was not a cry for help. It was calm, almost playful, as if she were talking to a doll. Sarah's heart, which had been broken 1,000 times, now fractured in a new, more profound way. This was her daughter. The sound of her voice, after 12 years of silence, was a beautiful, devastating symphony of joy and agony. "My special friend. He's showing me new things. He says the bad people are looking for us, but they'll never find us here. This is our safe house. Our code is... Wait, what was it, special friend? Oh yes. It's red, 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 and then green." Lily's voice trailed off, followed by a series of 3 distinct clicks, and then a different, final click. Sarah, her hands shaking, pressed the corresponding buttons on the recorder. The device chirped, and then another message, more clear and direct, played. "The garden isn't here. This is just a place we visit. The real garden. It's where the stars touch the water. He said it's our secret. Don't tell anyone. It's where we'll be safe forever." The message ended, leaving nothing but the hum of the recorder. Sarah sat in the empty room, the weight of the new information pressing down on her. The silence of the basement was no longer empty. It was filled with her daughter's voice, a ghost from the past giving a clue to the future. Lily was alive. She had been here, in this room, and she had left a message. But the secret garden was not in this house. It was somewhere else, a place where the stars touched the water. Sarah looked up, her tear-streaked face now hardened with a cold, fierce resolve. The hope was no longer a fragile bird, but a weapon forged in the fires of grief. Detective Sharma, her face a mask of shock and understanding, knelt beside her. "Where do the stars touch the water, Mrs. Miller?" she asked, her voice low and serious. The question hung in the air, a call to action. The case, after 12 years of being stone cold, was now wide open. And Sarah, with the sound of her daughter's voice echoing in her ears, knew that her journey had only just begun. The new evidence, a fragile blueprint and a haunting audio message, gave Detective Anya Sharma the ammunition she needed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a cold, professional fury. The night had descended fully, but the precinct was a hive of activity. Sarah, a ghost in the sterile, fluorescent-lit corridors, sat in a small office while Sharma marshaled her team. The legal process, normally a sluggish beast, moved with unprecedented speed. A search warrant was issued for David Miller's private architectural office, a space he had insisted was his sanctuary, a place where he communed with his art. Now it was a crime scene waiting to happen. The raid was swift and decisive. Uniformed officers, their faces grim and determined, broke the lock on the heavy oak door. The office, a testament to David's meticulous nature, was pristine. Every architectural model was perfectly placed, every drafting tool neatly arranged, every file meticulously labeled. It was a space designed for order, for control, for the crafting of perfect, precise worlds. The contrast between this immaculate facade and the monstrous reality Sarah knew was hidden within. It was a sickening punch to her gut. While officers methodically bagged evidence and photographed the scene, an IT forensics team descended on David's custom-built computer, the brain of his operation. Sarah and Sharma watched from a nearby office, the hum of the computers and the crackle of police radios filling the tense silence. It was a macabre theater, and Sarah was a captive audience, a witness to the final brutal act of her own tragedy. The lead technician, a young man with a focused intensity, worked his magic, bypassing firewalls and decryption programs. Hours bled into one another, each minute a fresh eternity of agonizing anticipation. Then, a low whistle from the tech. "Got something, detective," he said, his voice flat with professional detachment, masking the horror in his eyes. He motioned to the screen. He was running a private server, hidden behind a VPN and a series of encryption protocols. It's not just a file archive, it's an entire network. The screen, a vibrant display of code and data streams, resolved into a familiar, minimalist interface. The name at the top of the page, in a clean, elegant font, was the Architectural Fellowship. Sarah's blood ran cold. The word fellowship was a perversion, a grotesque twisting of community and shared purpose. Her fingers dug into the arm of her chair, a desperate attempt to ground herself as the reality of her ex-husband's evil began to fully unfurl. What followed was a descent into a hell she hadn't known existed. The logs weren't just a record of David's crimes, they were a social media feed for monsters. They chronicled his interactions with a small private group of men, each with his own chilling project. They shared videos, photos, and stories, all under the guise of architectural projects and family portraits. They referred to their victims not by name, but by code names and technical terms. Lily was Project Lily. Another child was The Blueprint. The meticulous language, the clinical detachment with which they discussed their heinous acts, was the most horrifying part. It wasn't a crime of passion, it was a perverted, twisted hobby, a shared passion. The peak of emotion hit Sarah with the force of a physical blow. The horror wasn't just that David had taken her daughter. It was the realization that he hadn't been a solitary monster, but a member of a collective, a predator who had shared her child with others. The nausea from the night before returned, a cold, bitter taste in her throat. Her body, her entire being, rejected this new truth with every fiber. Lily hadn't been a victim in isolation. She had been a piece of their sick, shared entertainment. The idea of her daughter's image, her story, being passed around and discussed in this grotesque brotherhood, made Sarah feel a furious, all-consuming rage. Her grief, once a quiet, paralyzing weight, now burned with the heat of a furnace. The forensics team continued to scroll through the logs, each entry a new dagger to Sarah's heart. There were messages about phases of their projects, progress reports, and chilling compliments from the other members of the fellowship. She saw David's carefully worded updates, his proud boasts about Lily's progress. The words were an architectural blueprint of her daughter's psychological imprisonment. He spoke of his work with the detached pride of an artist, an architect building his masterpiece. Then, the final, most devastating entry appeared. A message dated just an hour ago. The text in David's username read, "The plan is in motion. We are leaving. She will finally see the sun in a new world, a world where only we exist." The air was sucked from the room. The professional detachment of the police technicians shattered. A frenzied urgency, a raw, primal fear, gripped every person in the room. The meticulous planning, the long game David had been playing, was coming to a head. He was taking Lily, not just out of the house, but out of their lives forever. He wasn't just a monster. He was an architect of escape. "He's running," Sharma said, her voice a low growl into her radio. "All units. Bolo for David Miller and Isabella Miller, last seen in the greater Portland area. We have a confirmed kidnapping. He is a flight risk, and he is a flight risk with her. Do not approach without backup." The once organized office was now a frantic command center. Officers rushed out, shouting into their radios, their footsteps thundering down the hall. The methodical, patient hunt was over. It was now a race against time, a desperate last-ditch effort to stop a man who had planned this moment for years. Sarah stood amidst the chaos, the image of David's final message seared into her mind. A new world. The words were a promise, a threat, and a death sentence all at once. She looked at Detective Sharma, her eyes no longer filled with sorrow, but with the cold, hard fury of a mother on a warpath. Her daughter was out there, and somewhere, in the dark, a monster was taking her away. And Sarah, the journalist who had been awakened from her grief, would not let him get away. The final message from David's server had been a frantic, desperate boast. She will finally see the sun in a new world. But the police forensic team, working with an almost inhuman speed, had managed to track the server's last active location. It wasn't a new world, but a remote, old one. A secluded mountain cabin in the Pacific Northwest, a place that, according to building permits, David had constructed years ago under a different shell corporation. The hunt, once a desperate scramble, was now a surgical strike. Sarah was in the back of an unmarked SUV, a human-shaped vessel of pure adrenaline and raw nerves. Detective Anya Sharma, now more of an ally than a law enforcement officer, was driving. The air in the car was thick with unspoken tension. As they wound their way up a narrow, forested road, the city lights fading behind them, Sarah's mind replayed every possible scenario. Would Lily be okay? Would she even remember her? The thought was a dagger to her heart. After 12 years, she was no longer a mother searching for a 6-year-old, but a stranger racing to save an 18-year-old she no longer knew. The cabin appeared suddenly, a rustic, charming lodge nestled in a clearing surrounded by a thick, silent wall of Douglas fir trees. It looked like a perfect family retreat, a place for peaceful weekends and quiet escapes. The jarring contrast between its idyllic appearance and the monstrous truth it concealed was a sickness in Sarah's stomach. The police perimeter was already in place, a silent, disciplined force moving through the woods. The SUV came to a stop just out of sight, and Sharma turned to Sarah. "Stay here, Mrs. Miller. This is a secure operation. We have to go in with caution." "No," Sarah said, her voice a low, fierce growl. "I'm not staying here. I've waited 12 years. I'm going with you." Sharma saw the fire in Sarah's eyes, the unshakable resolve that had replaced her grief. She didn't argue. She simply handed Sarah a bulletproof vest, a heavy, uncomfortable weight on her shoulders, and a radio. "You stay behind me. Under no circumstances do you engage. Is that clear?" "Clear," Sarah whispered, her focus already on the cabin, a beacon of terror and hope. The police moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency. They approached the cabin, their guns drawn, their movements practiced and precise. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm that echoed in her ears. She heard a voice from the cabin, a low, soothing sound. It was David, and he was reading. The front door was breached with a single deafening crash. The sound of splintering wood tore through the silent night. Officers stormed the cabin, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Sarah, following Sharma, pushed her way inside. The scene that greeted her was both the fulfillment of her most terrifying nightmare and the mockery of her most cherished dream. The room was warm, filled with the scent of wood smoke and old books. In the center, in front of a crackling stone fireplace, was a scene of domestic bliss. David sat in a worn armchair, a book in his hands, his face bathed in the golden light of the fire. At his feet, her long blonde hair a tangled curtain that hid her face, sat a young woman. She was sketching in a notebook, surrounded by what looked like years of drawings and watercolors. The voice that cut through the silence was not a scream, but a quiet, commanding order from Detective Sharma. "David Miller! Police! Put your hands up!" David's head snapped up. His eyes, devoid of surprise, met Sarah's across the room. He didn't look like a cornered animal. He looked like a man whose peaceful evening had been rudely interrupted. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. "Lily, my dear," he said, his voice as calm and soothing as the fire. "It seems our visitors have arrived." The young woman at his feet finally looked up. For a moment, the world stood still. It was Lily. She was no longer a child, but a woman, her face a heartbreaking mosaic of her 6-year-old self and the stranger she had become. Her eyes, the same piercing green as Sarah's, were wide and filled with a deep, consuming fear. "Lily!" Sarah gasped, her heart exploding in her chest. The name was a prayer, a plea, a truth she had held on to for 12 years. She took a step forward, her arms outstretched, ready to finally embrace her daughter. But Lily didn't move. Her eyes, filled with a panic Sarah didn't understand, darted from her mother to David. She stumbled backward, her hand reaching for her father's leg. her body recoiling from the sight of Sarah as if she were a ghost, a monster. She pressed herself against David's armchair, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. This was the ultimate peak of emotion, the moment where joy and utter agony collided in a brutal, nauseating flash. The relief of seeing Lily alive was instantly contaminated by the crushing, soul-shattering realization that she was a stranger. David's smile widened, a triumphant, monstrous smirk that said, "I win. She is mine." Lily's voice, a terrified whimper, broke the silence. "No. No, Daddy. They're here. The bad people. You said they were all gone." Her eyes, filled with tears, looked at Sarah with a pure, unadulterated fear. "You're not real. Daddy said you died in the war." The words were a hammer to Sarah's heart. The horrifying truth of David's 12-year-long brainwashing campaign, the new world he had created for her, was now terrifyingly real. Lily didn't see her mother. She saw a villain from her father's twisted fairy tale. "Sweetheart, no. It's Mommy," Sarah pleaded, dropping to her knees, her voice thick with tears. "It's me. I've been looking for you." But Lily shook her head violently, her hands coming up to cover her face. "No! You're not her. My mommy died. Daddy is my protector. He promised to keep me safe from the bad people." The police moved in, their movements quick and practiced. David was cuffed without resistance, his smile never fading. He was not a grieving father, but a defeated king, watching his carefully constructed kingdom crumble. But even in defeat, he still had a hold on his princess. The battle was not over. The physical rescue was complete. But the psychological one, the infinitely harder one, had just begun. Sarah's fight was no longer just to find her daughter, but to find the lost piece of her soul, the little girl who had been stolen from her bed 12 years ago and replaced with a frightened, brainwashed stranger. The hope, once a fragile flicker, was now a fierce and desperate flame, ready to burn through a decade of lies to bring her daughter back to her. The sterile hum of the hospital room was a stark contrast to the rustic silence of the cabin. David was gone, swept into a justice system that would dismantle his twisted world piece by piece. But for Sarah, the real battle had just begun. Lily, now a legal adult at 18, sat on the edge of a bed, her eyes wide with a quiet, disoriented terror. The physical bruises were non-existent, but the mental ones, the ones David had so meticulously inflicted, were a chasm between them. The doctors and therapists had called it a textbook case of psychological grooming and manipulation. Lily saw Sarah not as her mother, but as a figure of a forgotten, dangerous past. She was a ghost from a world her father had convinced her was dead. The first few days were a quiet, agonizing stalemate. Sarah sat in a chair across the room, her presence a constant, silent question. Lily would flinch if Sarah moved too quickly, her body recoiling from any accidental touch. She ate her meals slowly, methodically, but refused to watch television or listen to music, claiming the noises were too loud and confusing. She would spend hours sketching in a notebook, the drawings a jarring blend of innocent fairy tale princesses and the meticulously rendered interior of the secluded cabin, her secret garden. A woman named Dr. Evelyn Hayes, a child psychologist with a gentle but firm demeanor, became their guide. The therapy sessions were a fragile and excruciating dance around a truth Lily was not ready to accept. Dr. Hayes would show her photographs of the real world, pictures of crowded streets, bustling cafes, and lush green parks. Lily would stare at them blankly, a small, sad frown on her face. "Daddy said those are just old pictures," she would whisper, her voice a fragile echo of the 6-year-old Sarah remembered. "He said the bombs took all that away." The pain of hearing Lily recite David's lies with such absolute certainty was a physical ache in Sarah's chest. Her tools were just as the summary had said: love, patience, and a constant, burning pain. The emotional peak of this journey was not a single moment, but a slow, excruciating climb toward a shared memory. Sarah had tried everything. She had sung old lullabies, read from Lily's favorite childhood books, and told stories about family vacations to the beach. Each attempt was met with the same blank, confused stare. Lily was in a self-constructed prison, and David held the keys. One afternoon, a week after the rescue, Sarah found herself in the quiet of Lily's room. Lily was sketching again, her brow furrowed in concentration. The silence was heavy with a decade of unspoken words. In a moment of quiet desperation, Sarah reached out and gently touched Lily's hand. Lily flinched, but didn't pull away. "Lily," Sarah began, her voice a low, trembling whisper. "Do you remember when you were 4? You were running in the backyard and you fell down. You scraped your palm on a piece of gravel." Lily's sketching hand paused. "You were so brave," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't cry. You just looked at the little cut and said, 'It's okay, Mommy. It's a wobbly line. We can draw a happy butterfly on it.' So I took a pen and I drew a little butterfly with a smiley face on your hand. You called it your happy butterfly, and you said it would make the wobbly line better." Lily's gaze, which had been fixed on her drawing, slowly shifted. She lowered her eyes to her palm, a pale, almost translucent hand that had been so carefully tended by David for 12 years. And there, on the heel of her hand, was a tiny, faint, white line, the ghost of a scar Sarah had almost forgotten. The pico de emoción final was not an explosion, but a quiet, implosive breakdown. A single, crystalline tear rolled down Lily's cheek, tracing a path through the dust of a 12-year-old lie. The wobbly line was still there. The happy butterfly was a memory her father couldn't have known. A private, intimate moment shared only between a mother and her daughter. David's meticulously constructed reality began to splinter. He couldn't have known. He couldn't have. Another tear followed, then another, and another, until the dam broke completely. The years of suppressed grief, of being told the world had ended, of believing her mother was dead, of a father's lies disguised as love, it all came crashing down. A low, wrenching sob tore from her throat, a sound Sarah had never heard before, a sound of a child finally mourning the life she had lost. Lily dropped her notebook, the pen clattering to the floor, and she turned. Her eyes, filled with a heartbreaking mixture of betrayal and raw, aching loss, finally looked at Sarah and saw her. "Mommy," she sobbed. The word a fragile, broken thing that carried the weight of a 12-year absence. Sarah knelt, her arms open wide, and Lily, the young woman who had been a prisoner for so long, finally flew into them. The embrace was not just a hug. It was a physical manifestation of a reunion that had taken a dozen years to arrive. Sarah held her daughter, her body a solid, warm presence, the tangible proof that she was real, that the world was still turning, and that the love she had held onto was a lifeline. Lily's tears soaked Sarah's shirt, but they were not tears of fear. They were tears of truth. The story does not end there. It is not a conclusion, but a fragile, hopeful beginning. In the days and weeks that followed, Lily began to heal. She asked for Sarah's drawings from the old box, and they sat together in the therapy sessions, slowly piecing together a new reality. The tears were not gone, but they were now mixed with laughter, as Sarah reintroduced her to the small, mundane joys of a world David had told her no longer existed. Their journey was uncertain. Lily would need years of therapy, of support, of learning to trust a world that had so easily forgotten her. But as they sat together, the silent communication of their shared trauma giving way to tentative conversations about a new home, a new life, a new beginning, Sarah knew they would be okay. The love between a mother and her child, a simple, unwavering force, was the only true sanctuary they would ever need. They had survived the long darkness, and now, together, they were finally ready to find the light. We want to hear your opinion about this thrilling story. What do you think will happen with them? Tell us your name, where you are watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the new stories coming up. See you next time.